Of all the beautiful towns, it has been my fortune to see. This is the Chief. You do not know what beauty is if you have not been here. High praise for Hartford from legendary author Mark Twain, who once called it home. But that beauty comes at a price.
Our town-based system is so divisive.
For months, NBC Connecticut Investigates reporters have traveled the state, and we found frustrated residents worried about the high cost of local town living, wondering, is there a better way? Tonight, NBC Connecticut investigates that question with the help of local leaders, academics, and community members who joined us for a forum at the Mark Twain House and Museum.
We need the city of Hartford to thrive. We need our capital to thrive.
Good evening. I'm Chief Investigative Reporter Len Bestoff. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with a simple fact. Connecticut has 169 different towns and cities, each with its own government. We have hundreds of fire departments, more than 100 911 centers, and over 100 law enforcement agencies. And all of this, Dan, comes at a price.
And Len, Connecticut has more than 200 school districts, but some of them don't even have enough students. Others have crumbling infrastructure, and our state and local tax burden is one of the highest in the nation, which comes at a price.
Dan, can Connecticut afford to continue on like this? Or is there a better way?
Some state lawmakers and candidates say it's time to start sharing services and are even considering cutting local aid. But is there even political will for regionalization?
So tonight, NBC Connecticut Investigates is taking an in-depth look at the high cost of local town living and the possible solutions. And Len, you recently took a trip down south to North Carolina.
I'll tell you something, Dan, it was really eye-opening. The high cost of living is driving people out of our state. Nearly 30,000 people leave each year. We traveled to North Carolina to see how life changed for a Connecticut family who moved down south.
Overtaxed, and they just kept going up and up and up, and yet our services always felt like they were getting cut.
Here's Beth Consol's old house in South Windsor, and this is her new house in Concord, North Carolina. Her property taxes went from $8,000 per year in Connecticut to $4,000. That's both City of Concord and Cabarrus County taxes.
Come here.
The tax bills were a pleasant surprise, considering Beth really didn't want to move in the first place. She and her husband were following two of their adult children. One moved for work, one for college.
I kind of went kicking and screaming, but I went because you go where your kids go.
And the family hasn't had to go without the government services it grew accustomed to, despite paying lower taxes. Their new hometown has 19 police officers per 10,000 people. That's compared to 15 per 10,000 in Connecticut. Their old and new fire departments have similar safety ratings, according to the Concord and South Windsor chiefs. But they do have less parkland, and the student-teacher ratio is higher, 16-1 in Concord, compared to 12-1 in South Windsor.
And it's just driven home more now that we're here. And we see that there is another way.
So just how is this community down here doing this? And it's not unique to this region or this state. What local leaders who have regional governments say is that they're able to spread out their costs over a larger group of people and save money on expenses.
Where the Consols live, Cabarrus County handles schools, tax collection, the health department, voter registration, and ambulance service. Their new hometown of Concord provides police and fire and trash pickup.
Now we've sort of embraced some of the differences and found that they may actually be a better way of living. They were just different.
We have a lot of folks who have moved down here from the north.
Concord Deputy City Manager Merle Hamilton says Concord and the county avoid overlapping services, and he says not having unions often drives down the cost of wages and benefits.
And there's a lot of conversation about being lean and bringing it down to where it needs to be and not having superfluous stuff.
Compare that to Connecticut, where 169 towns and cities right on top of one another often have their own schools, police, fire, and ambulance services, which number in the hundreds.
When I came here 50 years ago, there were 3,500 students. Now there are 30,000.
Bill McCoy, retired director of the Urban Institute at UNC Charlotte, says census figures show 100 people moving to Metro Charlotte daily. He says while transplants to North Carolina may have access to fewer parks and arts programs, the overall benefit of lower taxes means few move back.
You know, find a lot of people saying, I don't like it. You know, I want to leave. I don't want. It just doesn't happen.
Although Connecticut is divided into 8 counties, it is one of the only states without functional county government or an equivalent. And the question of whether Connecticut should change its long-held ways doesn't have an easy answer. We enlisted local leaders, academics, and community members to weigh in at a forum. The comparison with North Carolina came up more than once. Hartford City Councilwoman Wildelise Bermudez shared the story of a couple who relocated to the South.
They retired and they said, you know what? With our pension retirement, we can just afford to live a comfortable life in North Carolina because the cost of living is that high here.
Another panelist, Joe DeLong, made the opposite trip, believe it or not, moving from South Carolina up to Connecticut, and shared how easy it was to rent a moving truck.
I got a quote for a 26 or 28 foot Penske truck for $200 one way. And I said, what? I thought they had it wrong. And the guy said no. He said, we have so many of them down here from people who have come north to the south that we just need somebody to drive them back up.
One of the first questions I asked was if the cost of living is too high here, and are we getting what we pay for? And then you brought up quality of life.
The thing that I think so many people feel about Connecticut is that we are definitely getting something for our money. We think it's a great place to live. We have great schools in a lot of places. It's a great place to raise a family. But at the end of the day, we're all wondering, are we really getting bang for our buck? And these are questions that are kind of bipartisan, really, depending on your background.
And I mean, you know, it's the kind of thing you really have to consider and look at numbers. And we can't talk about the high cost of living in Connecticut without mentioning taxes. And Dan Corcoran's looking at the numbers.
Yeah, Len and Max, Connecticut, as you know, is one of the heaviest tax states in the entire country, and our property rates are actually all over the board.
Teresa Berger cringes every 6 months, every time her property tax bill arrives.
That's more than doubled.
3 decades she's lived in West Hartford in this 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath house. Teresa's property taxes for just this year, $7,351.92. Too much, she says.
The cost of the taxes has definitely surpassed what our incomes are doing.
For the first time ever, she and her husband are considering leaving the place they call home in hopes of landing someplace less expensive.
I think we're in trouble in Connecticut.
Many of Connecticut's cities and towns find themselves in a perpetual state of budget crisis, often resulting in wildly varying mill rates, which are used to calculate property taxes. 169 municipalities means there can be 169 different levels of tax burden. Right now in Salisbury, for example, the mill rate on a home is set at 11.1. In Avon, it's nearly 3 times that. West Hartford, where Teresa lives, 4 times higher. And Hartford, 7 times that of Salisbury. It's a high tax burden for our capital city, where 1/3 of the residents live in poverty.
Are we missing out on an opportunity to save money here in the state?
Absolutely.
Former Connecticut State Senator Gary LeBeau says there's an unwillingness to change here in the land of steady habits.
We're making it difficult for people to live here and to stay here.
LeBeau is among those who say a more regional approach could lead to lower taxes, municipalities sharing resources, cutting overhead and administrative costs, consolidating schools and other departments. A bold change, and LeBeau knows it's a tough sell.
Of course, those people are not going to jump on board. And where are those people? Those people are like embedded in the political system.
And taxpayers are picking up the tab.
We've been paying more and more, and I don't think I'm getting more and more.
John Souza has owned and operated several rental properties in Hartford and West Hartford for 30 years.
Where will Connecticut be a decade from now, and will you be here?
Well, a decade would probably be, I won't be if it continues on the path that it's going.
And if more and more people are deciding they might leave, what does that mean for those who stay? Back at Teresa's house, the tax man has already come and gone, and soon Teresa may be gone too.
This is home to me, and I hate to hear people tell me that, just move.
Now, Gary LeBeau, who you just heard from right there, was one of our panelists. He is a proponent of cost sharing and believes that regionalizing could actually save Connecticut upwards of $1 billion. But he says in order to have an impact, it has to be done on a larger scale, 7 to 10 towns coming together, if not more.
Here in Connecticut, our school districts outnumber our communities. Merging them to save money makes sense on paper, but the reality is a lot tougher. we'll take a look at what's holding us back. So the question remains, how do we get there? Here's what our panel had to say.
It's a problem that is ongoing, and we're trying our best to try to figure out more creative solutions.
These are things that could be fixed very easily at the General Assembly level with just some very, very modest changes.
We need to think about how legislative incentives, the language of the law, helps pull the society in the direction we want it to go.
And all we need is just rejiggering the state grant formulas and the way we do business in Connecticut.
First, through sharing of services with towns. Next, with schools. Finally, county government.
And we are not done with this conversation. NBC Connecticut Investigates will continue to look at how we run our local governments.
I'll be following the governor's race, and we'll keep asking our candidates how they plan to address this state's financial problems.
We will hold our leaders accountable when we find clear examples of inefficiencies, and we'll continue to ask if there's a better way.
We invite you to join the discussion. We have a section on the NBC Connecticut website dedicated to our At a Price series. Thank you for joining us, and good night.
I came up with from $250 million to up to perhaps $1.25, $1.25 billion that can be saved across the state of Connecticut.
$250 million in savings, or maybe even more. That's how much former State Senator Gary LeBeau estimates the state could save by regionalizing. He says our hyper-local way of doing things creates too many layers of government.
Take South Windsor, take East Hartford, Public Works, Parks and Rec, Senior Services, housing, on and on and on, and each one's got a head.
We have town charters that say the town shall have a fire chief and the fire chief shall report to the first selectman. So now you go to regionalize a fire district, guess what? You can't do it because that fire chief can't report to different towns and you can't get rid of him because the charter says you have to have it.
Public safety is certainly one area where there is room for consolidation. Connecticut has more ambulance companies than communities, and coverage depends on where you live. Overall, average ambulance response time in Connecticut is just below the national guideline of 8 minutes. But state data shows great differences from town to town. Regionalization could be on the table in Groton. In his budget proposal, town manager John Burt says the town can no longer afford to provide the same level of services.
Groton has 3 local governments, 3 police departments, and 9 fire districts, serving 40,000 people in a 30-square-mile area called the Town of Groton. The Town of Groton has 2 political subdivisions, the City of Groton and Groton Long Point.
We are working on ways that we can share services.
But City of Groton Mayor Keith Hedrick does not want to consolidate with the town unless it's part of a larger regionalization effort.
Not only do we pay taxes into the town, but we also pay taxes for the level of services that we have in the City of Groton.
Do you think it's sustainable, though?
Does it seem sustainable, practical? It is sustainable for a while.
Former Town of Groton Mayor Bruce Flax says the City of Groton government does not have to go away, but they have to find ways to share resources, save money, and become more efficient.
You would think that at some point the people to rise up and say that we need to flatten out what's going on in Groton.
At the end of 2017, the town of Groton combined its public safety and emergency communications and emergency management departments to save money.
So what will it take for regionalization to really become a reality in Connecticut? Our panelists weigh in when we come right back.
You're watching At a Price, the high cost of local town living on NBC Connecticut.
Welcome back, everybody. So much of our state, town, and city budgets go toward funding Connecticut's 204 school districts, each with its own superintendent. The state does have 17 regional districts consisting of 2 or more towns, but that too comes at a price. NBC Connecticut's Jill Konopka took a look at the cost.
It was really important for us to buy a home that we loved and also find a school nearby that our kids were gonna love and had good ratings.
2 years later, the Torres family of Torrington found out their beloved East Elementary School is closing at the end of the school year.
Bye, guys. I love you. Have a good day.
Declining enrollment means her youngest son will be sent to a sister school in an effort to save the district money. A decision Diana Torres believes comes at a price.
He's not used to change, so I'm scared that it's going to impact him grade-wise.
So they're packing it up.
We're going to sell our house just because we're not happy with the decision that the Board of Ed made. And we paid a lot of taxes and into the towns.
While there are no current discussions here to regionalize, many districts face the same dilemma. Lower enrollment numbers, fewer dollars, and potential school closings. In some cases, it's leading to school restructuring and talk of cooperative arrangements or regionalization.
As state government resources have shrunk as well, that's putting more pressure on these smaller districts.
Jonathan Costa is with EdAdvance, one of the state's 6 regional educational service centers.
Folks are spending a lot of money on systems that clearly are not very efficient.
Do you think we could benefit from county government?
It would certainly be more efficient.
There are more than 200 school districts statewide, many with generous superintendent salaries. Some districts even have multiple superintendents. So does Connecticut have too many school districts?
Could the number of districts in Connecticut be reduced and have the level of service to students maintained? I think that's clearly true.
Case in point, in one school district, there are 3 elementary schools, all have their own school board and superintendent. Others have similar overlap. Students in Region 4 then come together for grades 7 through 12. Jill Konopka, NBC Connecticut News.
Under state law, municipalities cannot budget less for schools than they did the year before.
And on the flip side, schools in Connecticut have hundreds of underfunded or unfunded mandates, things the state requires them to do but doesn't actually pay for.
It's literally something new every single year. And it's not just about the dollars. A lot of times you're talking about staff time. So it's an opportunity lost scenario.
Our panelists say another problem is that Connecticut's legislation is outdated.
And some of them say it doesn't give schools any incentives to regionalize.
This is certainly not the first time regionalism has been talked about in Connecticut, but previous efforts to regionalize on a large scale never got off the ground. Max, what is holding us back?
In one word, Len, politics.
From high atop New Haven's East Rock Park, you get a view of Connecticut government from above. Guilford, Brantford, East Haven, West Haven, New Haven, and even more. Each offering a litany of public services, police, fire, schools, public works, as well as local finance and elections administration. Connecticut's former Speaker of the House, Brendan Sharkey, spent much of his 16 years in Hartford pushing for more shared services in response to voter financial concerns.
More and more taxpayers are starting to understand that the way we do local government in Connecticut is so inefficient.
Sharkey represented Hamden, that shares a border with East Rock Park. He says what's preventing more regionalism is local constituencies placing immense pressure on their elected representatives to protect the way things have always been done, which he describes as a fool's errand.
I think a year from now, we're going to be talking about massive changes because whoever the next governor is knows this is a huge part of the budget and something has to give.
About 25% of all state spending, nearly $5 billion, goes to cities and towns for education and operating expenses. For the past decade, that percentage has remained consistent, even as the state has moved from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis, cutting spending elsewhere.
Maybe if we had unlimited funds, I would say each and every town absolutely take care of what you think is best for your town, but that's just not the case anymore.
Current House Speaker Joe Arasimowicz says the state has made the changes taxpayers demand, but cities and towns have not, which is why he says the state has to force those changes.
Why is somebody who's plowing a street in West Hartford stopping when it hits to Newington? Let's talk about that. Let's have the conversation. And I think if we phase it in over 5 years, first year we give them a pass. You should start doing this. Year 2, we'll start reducing the funding on a percentage. Year 3, year 4, year 5. If they think they only could do it the best way, then their residents going to have to pay for it.
Easton and Reading already share a high school.
Republican Adam Dunsby is both a state representative and the first selectman of Easton. He says his regional school district and other efforts that include Easton, Reading, and Weston have been successful, but only by choice, not by mandate.
I think it's a great idea. Obviously, it works for my town, so I'm in favor of it. But I think the towns have to make their own decisions.
There is bipartisan support for at least the concept of regionalism. Republican leader Themis Claridis says the issue needs to become a priority, so long as it's not something forced on local governments.
They need to know they're getting the services they need. They need to know it's being done in a cheaper way. Their taxpayer dollars are being used more efficiently. That is all you need to sell them on almost anything.
You know, Max, that seems to be the one thing these panelists agree on, is that the next governor has to take charge.
Without a doubt, Len. And this is, in fact, an election year. The Democratic candidate for governor, Ned Lamont, supports regionalism efforts if he's elected. Lamont is saying that there will be incentives for local municipalities to share services.
I'd be proactive as governor. I'd be trying to work off of our regional purchasing councils and get them to be a lot more active than they are now.
I also caught up with Republican Bob Stefanowski at the Crocodile Club dinner. He told me he supports consolidation at the state level. He said local government, however, is a little bit trickier, but would not rule it out.
You need to be careful, because part of the attraction of Connecticut is you got 169 very distinct places. The diversity of the state is amazing. But if there's things that could be shared on the back end, we need to look at it.
But really, Max, in the end, it's all about money. How does the state budget crisis that we seem to have year after year after year play into this equation?
The state is facing multi-billion-dollar deficits over the next several years. And the one pot of money that really hasn't been addressed yet is municipal aid, that cash that goes from the state to cities and towns. It's not going to remain untouched forever, which is why these conversations happening now is perhaps a good thing for some of these municipalities.
But when you call 911, how long will it take for an ambulance to get to you? The answer depends on where you live. Next, we take a look at the price of having so many public safety agencies.